Good evening. This is Jeanne Wilson. I'm president of the Redbud chapter of the California Native Plant Society, and we welcome you to our event this evening. This is a member meeting as well as a program, and we want to have a chance for people to give us some feedback and talk about what they'd like to see us do and what they're interested in and questions they have. So if you have questions or suggestions, I'd like you to put them in the chat if you can, and then we will talk about those a little bit later in the meeting. Redbud chapter has been established for over 25 years, originally established at Sierra College in Rockland, and now covers most of Placer and Nevada counties. We're very active in conservation, and we have research and publication. We have two guides to wildflowers and trees and shrubs of Nevada and Placer counties. We also get involved in local conservation issues, and we have established a propagation center, so we are now growing more of our own plants for the plant sales that we hold at least once a year. And we're hoping to have them more often in the future. So that's a little bit about us. There's over 400 members at this point in Redbud. We're growing, and we really invite people to participate and get involved. There are lots of different activities, lots of different sort of special interest committees for people who are interested in rare plants or ethnobotany or just a wide variety of topics. So at this point, I was sort of talking to give people a chance to get here.
We got Diane.
And, I'm sorry? I didn't hear that. Okay. So without further ado, we're going to open the member meeting. And again, welcome everyone who's here. Tonight, one of the responsibilities we have as a chapter is we have our own chapter elections and our own self-governance. And the October meeting is where people have an opportunity to nominate individuals for one of our 4 officer positions. We also have a slate that's selected by a nominating committee appointed by the board. And so we do have a full slate of candidates, but we also welcome nominations from the floor from anyone who is interested in nominating themselves or someone else. There is one requirement that if someone else is nominated, they need to give consent to being nominated. So the slate is as follows. Shane Hannafy, who is our current vice president, has been nominated for president. Carol Thompson, who is a volunteer coordinator for us, has been nominated for vice president. Susan Dewar, who is our current serving secretary and has been nominated for a second term. The terms are 2 years. And I was president, have been president for 6 years. I'm now nominated for treasurer because I've also filled that position in the past. So if there are any nominations, could you please put them in the chat? While we're waiting for people to do that, one of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about activities and how people can get involved. We are becoming more active in propagation with the new propagation center nursery that's been established. And so if you're interested in participating in that or being a nursery monitor or so on, can you please contact our email at nativeplanthelp@redbud-ca.org. cnps.org. And let us know that you're interested in participating in that. Thank you. Shane posted the address there for us. Other things that we're very active in is conservation and responding to proposals for development, et cetera, and giving the perspective of those who are concerned about our native plants and the impact that these developments might have on our environment. And so if you're interested in that also, you can send your information to the Native Plant Help at Redbud address. Okay, so one of the things, the second thing I wanted to talk about is that tonight we have nominations, and then in about 2 weeks, we have another meeting, which will also have a program, but it will be a meeting at which we need to elect officers. And there is a requirement that we have at least 5% of membership, which I think is about 25 members, but the more the better. So we would like people to make sure to put their mark on their calendars November 17th at 7 o'clock. And the information about how to join the meeting is on the internet, but you can also email us if you lose it and you want us to send it to you. And again, the purpose of that meeting will be to officially elect the officers for the next 2-year terms. So the program that night is going to be a terrific one by our current Vice President, Shane Hannafy, who also is our web director and our social media chair, and a co-chair of the nursery steering committee and the plant sale. So, but what he's probably best known for are his, well, most widely known are for his amazing posts where he talks about his discoveries of native plants and mushrooms and mosses, and he's going to be doing a presentation on the plant families of Nevada and Placer County, so that you, if you attend, you'll get a better idea of how to start recognizing what plants are in the same families, which helps you discover what they are. And when you know more, you actually see more and become more aware of what they may, the incredible diversity that we have of native plants in our 2 counties. So make sure that you mark your calendars, and please do come do sign up to attend on November 17th at 7 o'clock. So, not seeing any chatting in the chat, I'm going to go forward with our presentation on adventures in gardening with California native plants. And we have 4 different speakers tonight from different elevations and different climates and different settings. And I'm going to tell you a little about, let's see, they come from Lincoln and Dutch Flat and Alta Sierra and Chicago Park. Elevations range from 150 feet to 3,700 feet. And the settings range from suburban gardens to oak woodlands to mixed conifer forests. The first speaker we're going to have this evening is Carol Thompson, and she is from Lincoln. So she's at 150 feet, and she has been a big fan of California native plants since the early 1980s. It wasn't until she moved to Lincoln, Sun City, which is about 150 feet elevation, that she had her own yard where she could plant California natives. The last 10 years has been an adventure in learning about, experimenting with, and enjoying native plants in her yard. Her experiments include propagating native roses, buckeyes, and other native plants for her garden and for the Redbud chapter. Our second speaker will be Chrissy Freeman. Chrissy discovered the value of gardening with California native plants 15 years ago, just after she and her husband bought their home on 3 acres in the Chicago Park area of Grass Valley. She has been enthusiastically pursuing native plant gardening ever since. At 2,300-foot elevation, her property features oak woodlands. Her days often focus on native plants, gardening, propagating for Redbud plant sales, and volunteering for Redbud as publicity chair. She's also very active as a master gardener in Nevada County. Darlene Ward moved from San Diego to a 1/3 acre lot in Alta Sierra in 2006. Her property is located at 2,100-foot elevation. And when she moved here, Sierra wildflowers were new to her, so she joined a Redbud walk led by author and Redbud member Julie Carville and was inspired to join CNPS. When she started a native plant garden, she bought dozens of plants at the fall 2007 Redbud plant sale. She later became a docent at the South Yuba River State Park and has led wildflower walks there for 13 years. In 2011, she became a master gardener, and her understanding of native plant gardening has grown as her garden has matured. Finally, I'm the fourth speaker. I have, again, Jeanne Wilson. I have loved exploring the Sierra since childhood, and especially the plants. In 2010-11, I moved to 10 forested acres in Dutch Flat, which is 3,700-foot elevation, and I have tried to let nature guide my gardening efforts. Over 100 native plant species grow on our property, and I've tried to incorporate as many as possible of these into my garden. And I've also been propagating plants like Carol and Chrissy, and I look forward to talking with you this evening. All right, Carol? Carol Thompson will be starting now. Carol, we're not hearing you.
Let me try unmuting first before I share. That might work.
Thank you, Carol.
All right. I think this will work now. Let's see if I can do this. I practiced, so it should work. All right. Whoops, here we go. All right. Can you see it? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. All right. So as Jeanne mentioned, I'm in Lincoln. It turns out I had my husband look it up. He finds things online for me. We're actually at 253 feet at our house. There's some kind of program you can find online to look that up. So I have a small-ish suburban yard compared to the other speakers this evening. However, it is a very large yard to me because I lived in Southern California for many years in rentals and a duplex, and virtually did nothing other than have a bunch of potted plants. So I had not had much experience of native gardening at all before moving up here. And amazingly enough, over the years, I've done very little documentation. So when I tried to put this presentation together, I actually could not find that many many photos. We moved up here in January of 2009. We were here about probably 3 months, 4 months, when we got the dreaded letter from the Homeowners Association that said, and I quote, "Everything above the sidewalk is unsightly. Please do something about it." So that sent me into panic mode. I knew, moving in, didn't have a whole lot of money, didn't have a whole lot of experience. I did a wing it method as far as putting something together that I could take to the review committee and have approved. Sun City, for those who aren't familiar with it, the yards here demonstrate what I would call a mound mentality. Every plant needs to be in a ball, or it needs to be in a square, or it needs to be in a rectangle. People just don't let things go their natural shapes. So I'm kind of the outlier. My yard, in comparison to everybody else in Sun City, is quite different. This is my first start in the fall of 2009. I had found somebody to take out all the bushes. There was a huge juniper right in front of this window here, and that is the only window in that room. So that's the first thing I had taken out, so there'd be some light available to see in that room. But I started out with my wing it method, didn't do a whole lot of research, and as a result, I ended up with a red bud very close to the house, which I should not have done. So my big recommendation is always check the final size of the plant before you put it in, because since then I would change things around. Other thing about Sun City is that we have lots of rocks. It's a clay soil, but it's primarily like stream or river cobbles. When I tried to put in this 1 gallon plant, these are the rocks that I got out of the hole. So it's next to impossible to dig a hole and actually fill it back in with dirt. You always have to have dirt that you add in. And many people in Sun City actually bring in jackhammers to dig the holes in their yards because it makes it a whole lot easier. So after 2009, I didn't do a whole lot. Here's the front as it appeared in 2018. It does not look like this every year. It's going to depend on the rains. And the yard looks like this maybe part of March, April, part of May. And then I cut it to the ground because the poppies are done blooming, the blue-eyed grass is done blooming. So there's very little there. So what I ended up doing in 2015 was add a couple of fuchsias, and fuchsias are my absolute favorite native plant. And so the yard now, or this is current, but starting in June each year, the fuchsias start blooming. And this entire section fills in with fuchsia from June to, say, December. And that's 2 fuchsias that I put in initially that spreads out like that. Behind it is a section of California festuca, or Festuca californica, the California fescue. Here's that red bud. It's way too close to the house, and I have to spend more time than I'd like cutting it back so it doesn't rub against the house and it doesn't get too terribly big. So I cut back the fuchsias every year in December, and then the cycle starts again. Although this past spring, there were very few poppies and very little blue-eyed grass in spring because we just didn't have enough rain. We got, I think, less than 5 inches the entire season last year. In fact, this past weekend, we got almost as much rain as we got the entire last rain season. We had here 4.25 inches, but I know a lot of people got much more than that. Then the early backyard, we did have a lawn. We had slope, and this is kind of a composite, but that's 1 tree in the middle. There's 3 redwoods in the back. The slope was a real pain. You just couldn't, again, dig on it. I did try putting some things in, but wasn't very successful, so I just kind of gave up, didn't do much because I didn't have money to do anything in the back. I did not, however, stop buying plants. So what I did is I bought plants and I housed them in these smart pots, or these cloth pots, for a number of years before I could actually put them in the ground. And in 2014, in January, I just said, that's it. I'm not watering the lawn anymore. I don't want to have to mess with it. I don't want to have to get it mowed. It's taking up way too much water. So that sat as dirt for quite some time until 2018, when I was able to successfully find somebody I could work with to do the backyard for me. And what we ended up doing, or he ended up doing, is terracing the slope on both sides of the redwoods. And then I added these raised beds. There's 4 of them. I didn't take, they're not on the right side, but there are 2 over there as well. And that allows me to plant without having to dig holes in that rocky soil. With the terracing, the only thing that remained from the slope was the 3 redwoods, and there's a redbud here that I told them I wanted saved. But other than that, everything else was taken off the slope or buried. And in many instances, this is a fuchsia cultivar called Catalina. And that, along with 3 others, there's one here that came up through the rocks. This one comes up through the ground, through the dirt. This is the Catalina. This is just a regular California fuchsia. I thought that it was gone, so I put iris in the location of the terrace there. It comes up through about 6 or 8 inches of dirt. The Catalina is buried about 1.5 feet in the dirt, and it still comes back. So never underestimate your native plants that you put in. Sometimes I think they're dead, and I've gone to dig something out. Like the first year I put in milkweed, I had no idea it was deciduous and it would die back every year. So I went to dig it up, and here's this green growth under the soil. And I thought, oh, I'm way too fast on this. So I let it go. It came back the following year, and it's been getting bigger and bigger every year. Although this year, the orange aphids have descended again en masse, and that's a real struggle to avoid, or to be constantly squishing them and washing them off and try to help out the milkweed as much as possible. We do get wildlife in the backyard. The squirrel is my absolute nemesis. They came in, and right after the back was redone in 2018, and they just chew up all sorts of stuff. I've had to go to putting every single new plant that I put in has to be covered by a chicken wire cage. So I got some plants last spring at the plant sale, put them in May, came out one day in June and went, where the heck are my plants? And sure enough, some of them are dug up entirely and tossed like 3 feet away from the hole. A couple of them were dug up but laying over so that some of the roots were still in the soil. So I quickly replanted them, put chicken wire around them, and it looks like they're going to make it. I'll have to see what happens. We do occasionally get snakes, which is a lot of fun. Most people around here run screaming from snakes. I run in the house and say, photo op, and we run out with our cameras and see how many pictures we can get. And the hummingbirds, we have a resident hummingbird in the redwoods. And last year during the lockdown, I would say my husband's, I don't know how many hours he spent out there, but he easily took over 1,000 pictures of hummingbirds last year, and he still does not have the definitive hummingbird picture. Couple of highlights in the yard. Oh dear, Calicortus fairy lantern. I planted for the first time ever 105 native bulbs of different varieties. Most of them are in the backyard, but I put some in the front. And not knowing anything about bulbs, I actually watered them over the summer some. Hopefully not enough to have killed them. So we'll see if they actually come back this next spring. The miner's lettuce was a real surprise. It's in the far side yard, and I'd actually been weeding out there every year. And one year I didn't get out there in time to, catch the stuff. And when it actually developed, it turned out it was miner's lettuce. I have no idea where it came from, who brought it into the yard, but I let that side yard go every year, and we enjoy seeing the miner's lettuce. I don't eat it myself. I understand you can, but that's not something I've tried. And I put a picture here of my marin pink fuchsia, just because it's so unusual. We were up in Penn Valley a few years back and went to a nursery that had supposedly a native section, and this was the only plant that they had at the time. I've never ever seen a pink fuchsia before, so I nabbed it. The hummingbirds absolutely love it. I thought they wouldn't even go near it because it's not red, but apparently this is red enough that they like it. So my latest adventure, as Jeanne said, is trying to raise things for the Redbud sales and for my own yard. These are buckeyes. I've had relatively, for me, good success with buckeyes. This is going to be my third year, and in a couple weeks I'm going to start again with some seeds and with some cuttings and see what happens. But in general, I haven't really got the hang of it yet. There are a couple of things that I can grow, a couple of things that just die immediately. I mean, I don't have the good, I know they call it Google foo, but I don't have foo when it comes to raising native plants. So I'm still working on all the ins and outs of propagating with natives. And that's pretty much my presentation. I just wanted to leave you with one thought that I have in regards to my yard. Every time a plant dies, I see it as an opportunity to try something else in its place. So if you have problems with a native, try something else, because maybe that particular native just doesn't like your yard, which is what I have found in my situation. So I'm going to pass this along now to Chrissy. Let's see, how do I get out of this? All right.
Chrissy, you're muted.
There. I was like, okay, I know I'm muted, but I've already shared my screen. So how do I unmute myself while I'm doing that? Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Chrissy Freeman. Thanks so much for coming tonight, and welcome to our garden. I live at 2,300 feet in the Chicago Park neighborhood of Grass Valley, as you heard. And I'm going to share with you some of the native plant areas that we've developed on our property since moving here in 2006. The property is, it's an acre and a half, and about 2/3 of it is flat or actually a very, very gentle slope. And then 1/3 of it, what you see here, this is quite steep. And our neighborhood is a yellow pine plant community. Yellow pine is the ponderosa, but our area where our property is mostly black oaks in the yellow pine plant community with some redbuds. And this photo is a view towards the back third of the property. and there's never been any lawn or other landscaping there. But there were 2 horses that ate up all the small native plants for years while they were there, before we were there. And basically the only thing that remained were the oaks, thank goodness. The black oaks. Oh, the black oaks. I'm just in love with them, continue to be. They're appealing all year long. They're deeply colored leaves in the fall, and then the patter of the acorns, and then they make just a lovely shape in the winter, even, and particularly when we get the snow that contrasts with the very dark bark that gives it its name, black oak. And then the gorgeous, gorgeous hanging catkins in the spring. My goodness, who knew that oaks did that, right? They don't do it for too long, but they do it. And then in the summer, it leaves all the way out and you just get this welcome, welcome shade. So when we moved in, most of the landscaping, other than the native oaks, was lawn. I mean, lawn had been growing under oaks for decades. The cumulative effect was oak death. Certainly, many oaks had died before we bought the property, but in the first 6 months, we lost about 10 oaks, and then some, like this one, afterwards. So the result was that some areas were in full sun, which is not a natural state for the plant community that the oaks are in. And here's what we saw. Even after 16 years, in some full sun areas, no oaks had returned. We know deer do sometimes eat the tiny oaks, but I think that habitat type conversion is probably also a factor. And you're like, okay, so what's habitat type conversion? Habitat type conversion means that, the ecological changes from one type of plant community to another. And that's definitely what we saw. We'll see some of that. And then also the other thing we saw was the sunburning of the remaining oaks, because the oaks that stood in front of between them and the south, where the blasting sun was, those oaks were gone. And so these oaks got terrible, will eventually be mortal sunburn, but they've held in pretty well so far. So what did we do? We immediately got to work converting lawn to landscape. Everything that you see here, except for the tall trees in the background, was lawn when we first moved in. Virtually the entire front half acre was lawn. I mean, just lawn everywhere. So our goal was to remove the lawn in the areas that influence oaks. So very early on, we converted 4,000 square feet to native plants, and then an area for our vegetable garden and small fruit trees. Now, we have now converted 9,000 square feet, of which 6,500 is native plants. In places where the oaks remain, I've focused on planting native plants that are good under oaks, plants that need virtually no supplemental water after establishment. So here are some of my favorites. The redbuds, after which our chapter is so aptly named, and they look terrific in all seasons, and they're really easy to grow. They're in fact so easy that if you say to yourself, well, I don't like what it's doing, or it's gotten too tall, you can, at the right season, you can coppice it all the way back to the ground and it will grow back. I know this because I let one redbud volunteer in our garden, and it got really big behind the grapes. And at one point I coppiced it all the way to the ground after it was like 6 feet tall, and it was back the next spring, just gorgeous. So The hummingbird sage, it's not local. It's a Southern California plant, but it does really well in our garden with no water, blooming profusely under the oaks and making the hummingbirds very happy. As you can see here, it gets some morning sun and then noon and afternoon shade. Just gorgeous. The Sierra currant is a member of the ribes genus, and I love all the ribes. I planted a number of them under oaks. They virtually all do well there. This one, the Sierra currant, is local. And one of the wonderful things about the ribes is that they bloom really, really early. And some years they even get snowed on, and that is totally gorgeous. So with no supplemental water, they do go dormant in the summer, but they do return. So since I started gardening with natives, my designs and my plant selections have been informed by the concept of plant community. And that means, for those who don't know it, about what that means, it's an association of plant species that is similar wherever that habitat occurs. So I'll admit to having been kind of unclear about the difference between habitat and plant community until I came across that definition. So habitat is the where, like what are the conditions? And the plant community is the what grows there. And I have really treasured a particular book that talks about plant communities, and it's Designing California Native Gardens by Glenn Keeter and Alry Middlebrook. It is wonderful. So here is the chaparral plant community that we've established in our landscape. And we'll talk more about that. So we've kind of landscaped one part of our property at a time. And the chaparral area there was the first one that we did. And we'll look more about that. And the yellow pine forest under the trees, we also did pretty early. And we talked about those native plants already, kind of my favorites there. And then the chaparral is not natural there, but that's what we did when we realized that we kind of had this habitat type conversion going on where oaks were not going to be coming back to speak of. So I'll share some of my favorites about those plants. And then the grassland, we created a meadow, and we'll look at that. And then riparian. So unfortunately for us, because I love the water, unfortunately we do not have any naturally occurring streams, creeks, ponds, anything like that on our property. So they wouldn't naturally be riparian plants. But 2 years ago, so after 14 years of growing native plants, I was kind of, as they say, jonesing for some riparian plants in my yard. But I had all these black oaks, so I couldn't ever grow any. But I finally figured out one place that had riparian, that had that was not influencing oaks at all. And it also was in the on the south side of fence of our and it's on the shady side of the fence, so they wouldn't get that much sun, and I could put water in there. So that's what I did. But I'm not going to share those plants today because they're still pretty small. But I just wanted to share with you several of the plant communities we use. So in the chaparral area, we used the chaparral plants that fit our climate. That's what we used, but I didn't yet realize the special value of locally native plants, which is that they can be host species for our local butterflies, and that they're all of the animal community here co-evolved with our locally native plants. So this California buckwheat, which I have two, it's a really big buckwheat and it blooms profusely in the late summer and early fall. It does really well, even though it's, again, from Southern California. And the flowers even look great in the fall when they turn this gorgeous, gorgeous rust color. Right. And I eagerly await the blooming of the coyote mint in our chaparral area every year. It is totally, totally gorgeous. The plant is filled with flowers and they make bees and swallowtail butterflies very happy. And my single small plant, one gallon plant, has slowly grown to cover an area about 3 feet by 4 feet. I mean, it's really been a very successful plant. The coyote mint does dry out considerably after the blooms are spent. So if this matters to you, put it someplace where that fits your preferences. The coyote brush this particular one is pigeon point. It's a hybrid. I used it because it fits in the chaparral conditions, which, as I say, I did early. Now I aim to use just straight species because I live adjoining 15 acres of completely of wildland is completely untouched, except for some fire clearing. This ground cover is filled in more and more, though slowly, and it is covered with bees in the summer and the early fall. So here's our meadow, the grassland, in its first summer. And this used to be a conventional lawn. And 3 years in, it provides food and shelter for lots of wildlife, from quail and rabbits to bees and ladybug larvae. I believe there are some years when we've had ladybugs overwinter in the meadow already. So I watered this with converted overhead sprinklers, and I turned them off in the late summer because the sprinklers were already there. And these are the grasses in our meadow. They're all local to Nevada County. There's the Idaho fescue and the June grass and the tufted hairgrass. And they look really beautiful together. And after they dry out in the late summer, I cut them short with a string trimmer. And I've started adding perennials to the meadow, and I am just a complete fool for the penstemons, the local penstemons in particular. So I planted some other perennials in the meadow, but the deer ate away at the flowers, so there's nothing to show yet. Anyway, I'm going probably to cage them next year. And I know that the meadow will always be a work in progress. But I love, so on the left, you can see the foothill penstemon with the locally native yarrow, and on the right, the azure penstemon. Those are the two local penstemon for where I live. And of course, the red buds. Okay, so now the question is, what's happened now that I've put in all these native plants? And take out the lawn, put in the native plants, and the answer is native plants are starting to return. And this has been a complete joy for me, because now the native plant communities are fostering the mycorrhizae in the soil, and we're encouraging native birds, which bring seed, and some of these native plants have come back on their own. So this has been a long process. But here are some of my favorite natives that have returned. And the Western redbud, they were the first to return. I planted one, but there are some really big Western redbud just across the fence in the wildland. And they clearly gave their seed or via the wind, or perhaps birds brought them. The soap plant, this is in our back area that still has oaks. That's why there's shade there, and you see the oaks in the background. I was amazed the first time I ever saw photographs of a soap plant in bloom, because I didn't realize that they flowered at all, because the deer that frequent our property just always eat them, been their buds. So it's something else to cage, I suppose. And the goldenrod appeared, it was such an uplifting experience because it blooms in the fall for a really long time. And the patch has become, so it is literally a bright spot in our yard because of these flowers. And our patch has become somewhat more assertive than I would like. So I'm going to have to get to work on that and, reduce it in size so that it doesn't take over, a couple thousand square feet. And then this spring, the appearance of the yellow star tulip was just so gorgeous. We were so thrilled. I've seen these on our road in the spring, but I'd never seen because we live on a gravel road. And so, along the sides of the gravel road, I'd seen them, but I'd never seen them on our property. And this spring, there they were. They appeared for the first time. And I think that it might be because it was such a dry year that it was, for some reason, it triggered something and up they came. The other thing that I discovered this spring was that we actually have several Humboldt lily plants that are growing under those black oaks in the back woodland. Now, as you can see, they're only, 2 or 3 layers high. And I did, cage these, but I don't expect them to bloom for another 5 or 6 years. And so, I hope to be there and see our Humboldt lilies bloom. And watching the return of the natives has filled me with the totally greatest gardening joy. So, best of all, I love to discover how nature combines what we deliberately plant in our gardens with her own favorites. So that's part of what's happening in our yard. And so next will be Darlene. So take it away, Darlene.
So first I'll unmute and give me a minute to get my screen shared. Now, we should be in good shape. It'll be a pleasure to share my garden with you, but Chrissy and Carol, I've thoroughly enjoyed your presentations. And it's so interesting that we all have a different approach. As Jeanne introduced, we moved here in 2006. We bought a newly constructed house that was just 5 houses away from our son's home. It's actually also in the yellow pine community. A lot of people have more oaks than we have. We do have just one, and you can see that over on the far right side out by the street. Interestingly enough, with this last rain, our son had a huge black oak tumble, but it fell away from his house towards the street. Branches blocked the street, blocked the driveway, which he managed to drive over the branches to get to work Monday morning. Well, anyway, we're at 2,100 feet elevation. You can see in November 2006, we had already started moving our dirt around. And this picture I took last March of approximately from the same place. The first thing you need to do is decide your goals. I'm going to talk a bit about growing or designing and developing a native plant garden. Well, I know all those reasons for natives, but you know what? I just simply wanted California native plants because they intrigued me and they pleased me when I saw them. So the first year, we followed the rules of observing for a full year where the sun and the shade and the moisture and the soil and the microclimates are. And we did start our hardscape. And as you all probably know, hardscape is any non-living feature. My husband is the engineer, so he installed drains, water pipes, electrical conduit. We both scattered around for sources of local rocks. We had a lot, but we wanted more because he built a dry stacked wall all around the corner lot. And we built mounds, and actually we looked for any problems to solve. One, we wanted a little more privacy in our backyard. And I think we kind of achieved that. And the other was that we had a large leach line and we couldn't put trees in that area or any deep roots. So here's some of the things that he was doing. I would like to suggest you take photos, because once you cover up pipes with soil and plants around, you might forget just where they are. We enjoyed looking back at these. On the other side of the slide, we had some soil brought in. It was offered free from further down in Alta Sierra. So they brought this huge dump truck and dumped the soil. We used it to bury some of the rubble that we didn't know what to do with, some of the little rocks that we wanted to get rid of and junk, and then put the dirt over it. This is taken from the front walkway, and you can see we're looking towards the corner. I wanted to point out the flat area where the piles of leaves are and the rocks. The neighbor gave us the dry leaves and we spread them over the top, and that's going to be our meadow. So my part during that first year was to learn about foothill native plants. Coming from San Diego, I knew coastal sage scrub because I had taken classes at the local community college, but I didn't really know our foothill ones. So I read books. I didn't read the one that Chrissy mentioned until later, but I did like it also. I'll tell you the ones I used at the end of this presentation. I looked online, we took garden tours, we hiked and looked at native plants in their actual setting. And one that was really particularly interesting, we went to UC Davis Arboretum. I had read that coastal silk tassel, coast silk tassel, could get about 10 to 12 feet tall. Well, it wasn't until I stood there at UC Davis Arboretum and looked up that it really dawned on me how really tall and big that shrub is. Another thing that I did during that time was we started looking for ways to buy plants. So we did at the end of the year go to our first plant sale, and it was a redbud plant sale. As I remember, we helped haul some plants around because I was a member by then. So we had our trailer hooked up and we actually put a lot of plants in it to bring home. However, once you buy plants, now you've got to figure out where to put them. You're supposed to do it the other way. You're supposed to do a plot plan, and we did get a plot plan from the county, and I wrote directly on it because we had several copies made. You could use graph paper and use tissue paper over the top to design one garden and then design another and then choose your favorite. But anyway, it was really fun to buy plants. Trying to figure out where to put them was not so much fun, and digging holes in that hard red rocky soil wasn't so much fun. This slide actually shows what I came up with as some of the design features that I wanted. A curved pathway rather than angular, 4 feet wide so 2 people could walk side by side, Permeable surfaces, we're going to use decomposed granite on the path, and you can already see the mulch out on the bank. A convenient source of water. My husband made sure that there were hose bibs all around the property. The only thing I would like was if he had made them a little bit taller. So some he has gone back and extended them higher just to make it easier. Excuse me. And I wanted sitting rocks. I had a vision of maybe 2 or 3 of us sitting there on those rocks and talking about native plants. Well, it hasn't happened too often, but I use the rocks to sit on and to set things on. I also tried to make sure that there's plenty of space for the mature plants, and I didn't plant in groups of 3 like they often suggested, but I did use repetition. We have 4 red buds scattered around. We have 4 Carpinteria plants, and then I did plant a grouping of the mock orange. Okay, let's take a stroll through the garden, but due to the lack of time, it's going to be more like a sprint. In front, we do have the California poppies volunteering every year, and the Canyon Snow Iris. I put an insert of what it really looks like up close because it's a beautiful Pacific Coast hybrid and very, very hardy. Also, though, I used non-native plants. That's Harry Lauder's walking stick over on the top left. That's a golden spirit smoke tree, which is very striking in its chartreuse color. And then the dwarf conifers. Here's a hint about dwarf conifers. They tell you how big they might get in 10 years. They don't tell you what's going to happen in 15. Dwarfs do not stay dwarf. Then we're going to take the pathway down to the native plant garden proper. Actually, this is another design feature because it doesn't reveal what's around the corner, and it invites you to explore and to find out what might be hidden. Also, you can use different rooms, and I kind of thought of in terms of rooms on our property. Now we're down at the meadow, and the advice is to have drifts of color. Well, I didn't exactly plan that, but when you throw out seeds, different flowers bloom at different times. And here you can see the dominant color will be the yellow tidy tips. 5 spot is the first one to come up in the spring in the meadow, and it's all white. And then the Clarkia comes up. I have to admit, we've pretty much lost the Clarkia after we put a heavy mulch layer to suppress some of the weeds. And I did start with a wildflower mix that was more appropriate to the Central Valley because it was the closest thing I could find. Actually, later I realized I should have bought individual seeds at our plant sale. And then here, yellow chick lupin and the California poppies, along with the blue globilia, do seem to dominate quite a bit of the time in the late spring. You notice I put the date that the picture was taken just because it would show you, is this early spring? Is this late spring? But we're not going to talk much about dates. I do know you can go back and find this on the website once they get it posted. And then if you wanted to read more of the captions, you could. After the annuals stop blooming, the perennials really start to shine. Sonoma sage, Ceanothus dark star. Notice it has tiny leaves. The deer don't eat this Ceanothus, but the bucks do rub their anthers on it. The antlers, excuse me. And I've had to cage it because they keep breaking branches. Have you ever smelled the fragrance of Cleveland sage? It's a Southern California plant, but oh, it is so wonderful, and it does do well in our gardens. It can get woody, and it can die after a few years, but while you have it, it is wonderful, and you just might be lucky it might go on longer. The Pacific Coast hybrid comes in lots of colors, The California fuchsia down in the left corner is one of my favorites, and Carol talked about it. Here's the foothill penstemon, checker bloom, some paper onion bulbs that came from Nancy Gilbert via Karen Laurel. And then we have the Pacific bleeding heart and ginger in a very shady, a little bit more moist area. The left one, woolly sunflower, is such a bright, cheerful plant. And then, of course, a very favorite perennial is the showy milkweed. And I had to put in my 2 photos that I really treasured, because this was not this year, but it was last year. And it was perfect, the way the backlighting made them look so fluffy. Well, we have surprises also. Round-tooth oocow and fork-tooth oocow have both volunteered. They didn't come up right away. My thought is probably when they were doing construction, they shoved soil over them, and it just took them that long to finally work their way through to the surface. The fork-tooth appeared, I'd say, only about 2 years ago. And I didn't plant it. We had been here about 13 years. Where was it all that time? I did plant the snake lily. I did buy a bulb or 2 from the Nancy Gilbert at a plant sale when I didn't understand what any of them were. Put it in the ground, and I never saw it again until last year. And it did start blooming last year. Down on the left, the woolly sunflower is gradually making a new plot here and there. And I think when you first see the plant come up, it's such a distinctive appearance. The white California poppies, I had 1 clump and I loved them. Actually, when we were doing a fall cleanup, that clump got moved. And now I only have a couple of scrawny ones. I keep hoping they'll come back more. And how about the moss when it comes up? Isn't that beautiful when it rains? Okay, but now we're done with the annuals and the perennials that are lower growing. Let's look at the shrubs. And you all know shrubs can take the place of small trees if you have a smaller property, or they can act like small trees. They can help define an area or a room and screen an undesirable view. I chose ones that would flower, and they do flower at different times. I don't think I really planned it that well, but it's turned out pretty perfect. Remember this picture from when I was talking about the garden design? Here's the pathway 5.5 years later with the shrubs growing, and look at that western redbud and the Ceanothus Ray Hartman. However, during one of our early storms, about 3 years ago, I think, a major branch broke off Ray Hartman. And then within a few months, the whole thing died. I guess it had been an insult. They talk about the insult of injury. I don't know what it was. But one of the books that I had used had said some Ceanothus could be short-lived. It might be people give it too much water. But he concluded, you know, enjoy it while you have it because it is so spectacular. And then, of course, the redbud blooming on bare branches is just a perfect thing. Pink manzanita on a mound. Our local one is white leaf manzanita. It can be trimmed up and made into a specimen. Here are my currants. I have a lot of the pink flowering, but then I did plant the white icicle flowering one. Gradually, the pink flowering is forming a thicket. I need to move some of the little plants out from under. The fuchsia flowered gooseberry I planted for 2 reasons. One was that I treasured it from the San Diego canyons and thought the flowers dangling were so beautiful. The other was the deer were cutting through this part of the yard. And I thought the large shrub with spines at every node would be a pretty good deterrent. But it has helped, but the deer do like to walk on our pathway, and they encircle the meadow. Also, the thing about fuchsia flowered gooseberry is it puts out green leaves with the first rain in the fall through the winter. Then we have the Pacific or mountain dogwood, and this one only has 4 petals. I believe they're really called sepals, but it can have up to 7. Here's another grouping of shrubs. The bush anemone on the left is a young one, but look at all those white flowers. They're 2.5, 3 inches across sometimes. In the background, the lodgepole pine is a special one that has golden tips in the springtime. And then the snowdrop bush on the right has 1-inch bell-shaped flowers. And snowdrop typically grows in a forest along like the South Yuba, down closer to the river, but it grows here too. Both of these, the Carpentaria and the snowdrop bush, have interesting seed pods after the flowers go. And on the Carpentaria, they look almost like stars from a distance because of the way the sepals hang on. The snowdrop are little balls, and they hang on for a while before they drop to the ground. Here's the wild mock orange right next to a spice bush. And again, look at the different flowers. The strappy red ones of the spice bush are quite unusual. I really like the single form of the mock orange, I think even better than I do the double. But I have the mock oranges planted in a group of 3, and they also help screen what we don't want to see. Here's cream bush or ocean spray, holodiscus, native in our local mountains. And this was, my first view of it was on that walk with Julie Carville right after we first moved here in August of 2006. We had a blue elderberry volunteer right in the middle of our meadow. And it has the flat-topped white flowers upright. And then when the berries form and as they ripen, they point down. A word of advice, don't eat elderberries raw. They can cause a severe stomach upset. Also, if you see the red form of the elderberry, it can be very toxic. Do not eat it. I make jelly and juice from the elderberry. Here's desert willow, and you'd think it wouldn't grow here. It is one of our best small trees, and it blooms in the summertime into the fall. It's just now stopping its blooming. This one happens to be one that had the 2 colors. It can be a cream flower, it can be a pink flower. Just be sure you don't buy one that is a hybrid with a catalpa plant tree, because those get huge. We have 2 vines. The first one would be Rogers red grape, and we have one of those in the demonstration garden also for master gardeners. And I keep telling everybody, give it a try. Make juice from it, make jelly. And they kind of look at me. It's a small grape, like a Concord. It's a little bit seedy, but it is a little juicier than our straight wild grape. For a while we had the wild grape, but I found I didn't want to do anything with those grapes. These I love to pick, and I will juice them. This year, instead of cooking them down like you do for jelly, I learned to put them through a colander with my KitchenAid and press the juice out. I really enjoyed it. And then I leave a little bit, and in short order, the birds at the end of the season will clean up every grape that's left. Dutchman's pipe, you maybe know that from down at Bridgeport, where the pipevine swallowtails are usually in abundance. I planted Dutchman's pipe. It grows on our fencing around the vegetable garden. And I was really thrilled the first time I saw it bloom. I have yet to see any pipevine swallowtails in our area. Okay, when we plant a garden, we think about seasonal changes, and we want something that appeals in all seasons. So I think vine maple is an excellent one for our area. It's more common up in Oregon and Washington, but the far northern part of California is also where it grows natively. Rogers red grape is known for its wild, fiery red leaves. And then that mountain dogwood, look at how red it turns. Right now, it's more of a maroon color. And my western redbud, instead of being red, it turned out to be yellow. And there's even interest in winter. Look at all this snow around. And frost, I love to go out and try to catch a good photo then. Yes, we did have some problems. 3 shrubs blocked the view when we tried to back out of our driveway, so we moved them. 1 survived, the other 2 died. One of them was a desert willow, so I rebought it. And we found out that we had planted some of the dwarf conifers a little too close to the house for fire safety, so they had to be moved. Also, just this past year, PG&E's representatives informed us, oh, you need a 15-foot clearance around the power pole. These shrubs have got to go. We moved 2 shrubs, I believe. The others were way too big, and they said, well, we'll come back and move them. They haven't been back. I've pruned them back as far as I can. I hope they've forgotten to come. I think there's still plenty of space. And then I've already mentioned branches that break with snow. The books I found most useful: California Native Plants for the Garden. I would love to be able to hold it up. It has blue flowers on the cover, and or I guess they're purple, I'm sorry, blue-eyed grass. That book, if you look for it on Amazon, even a used copy now costs over $50. I noticed on our fall plant list that we were offering it for sale at its original price of $29.95 or $99, whatever it was. So if there are any of them left, and if you have never seen it, it's, I think, really a kind of a classic for helping you. Also, Native Treasures by Nevin Smith, and it was from 2006. So it was a brand new book back then. He was a horticulturist, and he talks about his favorite plants, and he talks about a lot of the cultivars and tells where they were selected. And I didn't mention, back 15 years ago, we didn't really think too much about whether you buy the species or the cultivar. Now we're worried, is a cultivar altered in some way that the native pollinators won't use it? A lot of people are conducting studies trying to figure that out. I still have a lot of cultivars, as you've noticed, because they usually do have striking reasons for being used. But as long as they're selected, then they're still native in my mind. If they are manipulated and turned into a hybrid, maybe not. And the third book that was useful and newly published at the time I started was our very own Redbud Wildflowers book. Now we have edition 2, which of course I bought right away. And I hardly could wait for Trees and Shrubs. And finally it was published in 2014. Now we have online resources that are truly great. Let's start with the RedbudChapter website. And I just put down for the home page. Partway down the home page, you have these choices: events and field trips, or gardening with natives, or native plant 101. let's click on Gardening with Natives, and a page comes up, and partway down you again have choices. You can click on a category and it describes that category, and if you go clear to the bottom, you'll find a list of several different articles that have been written by either our Redbud people or have been found to be important. And you can click on those to read those articles. You can scroll down on this page and also on some of the others I discovered, and you'll find an article on how to use Calscape, and I'll be showing it next. Also, I found if you click on blog at the very top of the page, you'll find some of the recorded presentations there. We were talking about this earlier too, and there's another place if you click on events on that first home page where you can find the recorded presentations. So Calscape, it was started by someone down in San Diego who was doing his own design. And in fact, I didn't get that said. You know, when I've talked about design and some of the design suggestions, it really doesn't matter. If you design your own garden to please yourself, it's a very personal space, and it really doesn't make any difference whether you followed rules or you came up with what you liked. It's your garden. But to find the plants to put in your garden, Calscape is a wonderful tool. You can put in your very own address, and then it will come up and tell you what of these different plants are likely to grow in your area. And you can see all the different categories that you can choose. You can do an advanced search and have other criteria that will help sort the plants for you. Or you can, up in that upper corner where it says search for California native plants by name, you can't quite see name because it's blocked out. Let's type in California fuchsia. Oh, and if you want to learn to use Calscape, remember I said search on our Redbud site, and there's an excellent article there that will tell you how to use this. So, okay, we're going to search for California fuchsia, and this is the page that comes up. It has photos. It has a map with a distribution. Look at that, all over much of California. And if you look down lower, you'll see a couple of paragraphs describing it. Notice where it says 66 nurseries carry this plant. Or you can develop your own plant list. And I didn't make a copy of it, but further down on this page, there are things like what type of cultivation it needs, the habitat, the pollinators, the plant community it does well in, and that you can even make plant labels. So then there is another website you might want to explore, CalFlora. And again, just simply put in calflora.org. This is from their home page, and you can see the different categories they have. What grows here, the planting guide, great places to view native plants, search for plants by county or whatever. We're going to click on the planting guide, and this is what you get. Now, if you want to know how to use this one, do you see where it says tools up here? If you click on that, that's where help is listed, and they have a very good article explaining just how to use this. Briefly, you can put in your address. I just put in Alta Sierra, California. I wanted low water and shade plants. And here's for more criteria if you had more. But when I just did these and said search, I got a list of 7 grasses, 11 annual herbs, and 35 perennial herbs. And if I click on a picture, I can make choices that will take me to where I learn more about them too. I'm not going to say anything more about it because you need to just explore on your own. The final source is not just for native plants, but UC Davis has been supporting Woo calls. This is now the 4th version. They've asked many landscape designers to please rate the different water usage for various plants. So you will be able to find both native and non-native plants that are classified by what kind of water they need. So it can help you in doing your plant communities. Again, you'll just have to explore the site on your own. Well, I wasn't watching the time, but I think we need to close out. My final thoughts are, if you treasure the relatedness of all living things, then native plant gardening may be right for you. There's always something new to learn, to observe, and to appreciate when you grow native plants in your garden. And my final one, your plants will become your friends to be nurtured with love and care. Okay, I am done. We should be back to Jeanne's presentation now. Are we there, Jeanne?
Yes.
Good. It's all yours.
Okay. Are we seeing my screen at this point?
No.
No.
Okay, I thought I said share. Okay.
We're all going to be pretty skilled at this.
I'm sorry, Jeanne, do I have the authority to do this?
Yes, you're a co-host.
Well, it's stuck. Okay, I'm sorry.
You're a co-host, so you do have, you will be able to do this.
Okay.
There you go.
There it is. There we go. Sorry about that. All right. Well, we've heard some really wonderful things from our other presenters, and this one's a little different, partly because of elevation and partly because of our story about what's happened here. So when we moved to Dutch Flat, which is at about 3,700 feet from Davis in 2010, these pictures show a little bit about what it looked like. It was a forest garden, and it was wonderful to be in such a shady, cool place after living in Davis for 32 years. We learned some history when we moved here. There had been a fire in 1959, started as they were building Highway 80, and it burned everything here to the ground. But less than 60 years later, the forest had regrown. The oaks had resprouted and were 70 feet tall, and amazingly, the ponderosas had grown from seed, and many of them were 90 or even 100 feet tall or taller. It was very dense. It was probably about 250 trees per acre. We didn't count. We had 10 acres, and that would have been a lot of counting, but it was pretty dense. There were diverse trees, but not very much in the way of understory. You can see some bracken ferns in that picture on the right, and that dogwood over in the picture on the left. We had several kinds of trees, both ponderosa and sugar pine, black and canyon live oak, Douglas fir, dogwood, so on and so forth. It was good soil, as witnessed the trees were able to grow almost 2 feet a year for 50 some years, and then a western aspect, so we got lots of sun. I did a lot of exploring because I loved the forest and loved looking around, and discovered over the course of these 10 years or so, over 100 native species of all different kinds. And then the shock was in October of 2015, I found dozen trees dying from bark beetles. I had to get help to find out what it was, but that's what it was. And they told me you will see more of these, and I did. So in the pictures from May of 2015, compared with what happened afterwards, all of the trees below the house died. So the ponderosas, the trees you still see there that are green, are all firs. And then behind those, you see row after row of dead ponderosas. So we had loggers come in and take out those trees. And then you see on the right what it looked like on the ground after all those trees were taken out. It's pretty barren. So between October 2015 and October 2016, we lost more than 1,500 trees that died from the bark beetles. And they've continued to die. First of all, it took several years to get rid of all the trees because it's very steep property. We had to do much of it by hand. And then recently we've had another 150 plus trees that died from another attack of bark beetles. So they're still here, and with this drought that we've had for the last 2 years, they came back. Obviously, losing all those trees dramatically altered the growing conditions, but it did have some pluses. One, we had a view that we didn't have before, and two, we have light and space for understory species. A couple quick things about this photo. You'll see a dry stream bed that I had put in to be able to spread the water that came from the drain off the roof so it wouldn't just run off. It soaks in. And then we had, in the very right foreground, you'll see we had a couple of gardening beds put in. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so as I was going through the experience of trying to figure out how to help our forest recover from that shock of all that loss of trees, wanted to know what is healthy and resilient. Obviously, the forest was much too crowded before, and there wasn't enough light, water, and nutrients to support all those trees, and they were open to attack. So what we wanted was an open canopy, and we wanted to preserve and encourage existing local native species that were on site. And all three of these over here, the bay and the Sierra gooseberry, had been here before, and the flannel bush popped up in the middle of the masticated soil below the house, all on its own. And so that was a wonderful surprise that it showed up. We wanted to continue to encourage understory diversity. Before, it was mostly just pine needles, and now we have all kinds of shrubs and grasses and perennials, vines, all of that. We wanted to introduce compatible local natives from nearby, and the biggest challenge has been trying to remove and get rid of the non-native invasive species, and especially the Himalayan blackberry, which is, I had it removed again last year, and it's all back 6 months later. So that one's a really hard one. Some more things that we used to help guide us. We wanted to, and you've already heard about this from our other panel members, but trying to design and create garden areas that are adapted to specific plant needs and characteristics, or the other way around, find areas to put plants that have specific needs and characteristics. And there's more on this later, but we're in a really fire-prone area. We know there's been fire through here before, and there will be again. So we really are conscious of fire-wise practices as much as possible. And as I said, I'll talk more about that in a minute. And the final thing I wanted to say here is that when the forest was thick and dark, there were very few native grasses that could be found. And once the trees were cut down, they exploded. You can see the blue wild rye up there is just amazing. It covers probably a couple acres now, and the California melic grass as well. But I had a botanist come and help me because grasses are hard to identify, and they identified 10 different native fence grasses on the property, which we encourage them because they're so good for the soil and wildlife and so on. The goal is to, as I said earlier, preserve local natives, on-site natives, and bring in others that are local to add to the diversity. So the white trillium is actually from one of my neighbors. They were a gift. They grow on this hill that we live on, Frost Hill, but they weren't actually on our property. Now they are. The fawn lily and the spice bush are from plant sales. The silver bush lupin was a transplant from a friend's place, and it obviously loves it here. So the fire-wise aspect here is especially right close to the house. You want to keep things really, really low to the ground, right next to your house. Reduce anything that's flammable as much as possible. And so the strategy that we're using is next to the house. We use rock gardens and bulbs, and some are dominant and annuals. So I cut them down. So you'll see on the left is what it looks like in spring with the wild hyacinth and the star tulips and California poppies and a lot of penstemon. And then when it gets to be summer, I cut all the dead, dried out poppies down and so on. And that's pretty fire safe there. There's not much to burn. And another example is that was the west wall. This is a south facing wall. And again, you see the penstemon, and there's some heuchera and woolly sunflower. So in the spring, those two lower pictures on the left and the middle are the plants are green, and then in the summer, again, I cut things back and keep it as low as possible and as dry as possible in terms of not very much plant life. I do water in there. The penstemon is now blooming again in almost November, which is interesting, but I had cut it back to the ground. I want to say one thing about the brown bells. They're fritillaries, and they're local, native, and I had collected seeds, and this is the one I still have several plants, but this one has actually bloomed now for three years in a row, so I'm really pleased that I was able to get that to grow. So the other speakers have talked about seasonal changes and compatible needs and all the different colors, and that's sort of what we've been looking for. We have that I mentioned the garden beds that we had put in, and they are stepped down because there's a change in height between the house and the lower garden. And so these are the kinds of things that we put in it. People have talked about California fuchsia and woolly sunflower. I love the penstemons, and the blacks is just really striking. Ethereal spear is another bulb that we put in there, and the Humboldt lily is a rescue. It was a construction project, and they were gonna put in a parking lot, and so we were able to rescue these plants, and they bloom before it gets to be summer, and then they can be cut down so they stay lower. A couple other things in there are things like emerald carpet manzanita, which is very slow growing, and the native strawberries, I will just say, they've spread like crazy, and they're very low growing. They have pretty white flowers, and they are delicious. So they're great ground cover. Like Chrissy, I really like riparian plants and don't really have water on the property, but that dry stream bed, I've sort of turned it into a haven for water-loving plants because I water sort of at the top and the water runs down. And these leopard lilies I also grew from seed from local plants, and they love the water, and the birds just have a wonderful time hopping through this part of the garden when I'm running the sprinkler. And it's what I call a green belt because it's near enough to the house within a few dozen feet, like 30 to 50 feet. And that is a good place to have plants that are green and water loving. The stream orchid is another rescue from road work that was being done. The columbine and the streambank lotus, like the leopard lily, are seeds that I collected in riparian areas and then planted in my garden. Then there are plants that like it dry. More seeds that I've collected, the mock orange and the pine lupin. I grew from seed, and the buckwheat. The slender hairgrass is another one of the native grasses, which is really delicate and stays in small clumps, and it's really spectacular. And I think I'm probably the third or fourth person who's mentioned showy milkweed, but it took a long time to get big enough to flower, but now it's going strong. Sonoma sage is very good at spreading and a great ground cover, very fragrant, and I love the globe lilies. So, and those are all for places in the garden where it's not wet. I call these plants hiding in plain sight because they're things that they're pretty common around here, but some of them you might even think they were weeds, like the American vetch. We know there's vetch out here that's weedy, but the American vetch is actually a local native. It's very pretty. I mentioned the mountain strawberry before. The sticky cinquefoil is what really, it looks maybe a little weedy. It's in the rose family, but it's actually, I think, a pretty flower, and it's good sort of filling in and covering ground and helping prevent the other real weeds from trying to take over. Sulfur pea is another one that, unless you catch it at the right time of year when it's blooming, you might not think much of it. It's just this green spreading vine, but it's got these amazing flowers that go from white and pink to sort of pale orange to deep sulfur orange. The rough-leaf aster grows about 18 inches high, and it spreads, and it's very tough, and it's a late blooming flower, so it's great for pollinators, as is the goldenrod. And all of these are things that California cudweed, again, another one that you wouldn't, it's an everlasting, and it you may think it's a weed, but it's not, and it's very good for pollinators. So those are just some of the ones that I found on the property, and was delighted to learn that they were actually native. I call this next batch the showstoppers and hidden treasures. The bleeding heart and the Sierra currant and the dwarf rose you can buy at plant sales. They are clearly pretty special. The Sierra milkwort, I didn't realize I had it here for years. Until I found it out on a hike in the Sierras and came back and said, "Oh, wait a minute, that's what this is," because I had never seen it bloom here, and now it does. The woolly lotus, same thing. I never saw it bloom for years. They're sort of shy and they hide, but they have those lovely silky silver green leaves and unusual two-tone flowers. And finally, the Torrey's monkey flower is one that now you see it, now you don't. When we built the beds and we did the work around the house, it popped up all over the place, and then it was gone. And then we did work somewhere else, and it popped up. So that's one that loves disturbance, and so you might find that when you do some construction or digging. it might come up. And then the last, same kind of thing, the riverbank lupin, I never saw it bloom. I knew it was a lupin, but the deer ate it every year. And so I finally put a cage around it, and that's when I discovered it's this gorgeous, gorgeous lupin. The soap plant, I didn't see the flowers for another reason, and that was because I didn't realize that they bloom at twilight. I kept seeing the buds and kept expecting them to open, and then one day I walked out there at about 6 p.m. and they were all in full bloom, and that's because they're pollinated by moths. So that was a discovery. So that's about it. I wanted to contrast these two pictures. I was preparing for this presentation, and I took a look at these two pictures and said, wait a minute, the tree that's circled in those red lines are the same tree. They're madrone. And in the first picture is May of 2018. And you can see those little fence posts there. And it's about a foot shorter than those fence posts. So it's about 5 feet tall. In the next picture, which is only 3.5 years later, it's now almost 3 times as tall as that pole. So it has shot up close to 10 feet in 3 years, which was a shock to me. And I hadn't realized how much it had grown until I compared these two pictures. So just saying, and look at how lush that, even after 2 years of drought, how lush the forest is in back. It's like, again, the resilience of these native plants and their beauty just never cease to amaze me. So I wish you the best in enjoying our gardening with our California native plants. Thank you. So now, share. Okay. So what? Now is our opportunity to have any questions. I think we had one that from Dee Dee that was about planting it at, if there's already been frost and cold temperatures and you've got an elevation of 4,650 feet, daytime temperatures are warm, nights cold, can you still plant native plants? Are you talking about now in late October, early November, Dee Dee? You asked. Or does anybody want to comment on that from our panel?
Jeanne, I would think you're more qualified at your elevation. From what I have been told, even though the nights turn cool, the ground is still warm enough that we could plant maybe through November.
I've done it. Yes. It sort of depends on the plant. If I'm concerned that the plant will get frozen, then I might not, or I might protect the plant by putting something over it to protect it from the cold. And Dee Dee added, would plugs be okay? Well, I've had some okay luck with plugs. Are you talking grass plugs or perennials? Perennials. Again, on those nights when it gets really cold, it's possible to protect the plants, for one thing, by like putting a bowl over it, something that will help keeping them wet, because the evaporation helps keep them from freezing, and then put something over them to protect them overnight, since during the day it's fine. That would be my guess. Other questions or comments?
Well, I'd like to point out that Jeanne has posted the website links for Calscape, Calflora, the various ones that I was mentioning in the chat list.
Well, I actually missed some of them. So
You didn't.
maybe I did get Calscape, but I didn't get the rest up there. So I apologize. We'll get them up there.
Well, and if people just remember the name, Calscape, Calflora, WooCoals, they can do a search and the website will come up.
That's right.
It's easy to find it. I was also kind of excited. TC has posted that California Native Plants for the Garden is newly republished. TC, are you still there and can you say anything about that? Maybe not. Anyway, it's exciting to hear that they did republish it because I felt that it should never go out of print. Not every single plant that we have up in the foothills in Northern California is in the book, but it's pretty extensive and the information is very good.
Great. So we have a couple other questions. Raylan would like to be unmuted. Okay.
I think we were going to let our faces show, weren't we, Jeanne?
We were. I guess we could do that.
You
Raylan,
can show my face if you want. Okay. So, I'm a teacher at Yuba River Charter School, and I've been helping out with gardening and native plant or native, what do we call it? Nature studies classes. And I'm working with somebody, and her name's Uta, and she wants me to plant native seeds with the kids at the school, and not, like put them in pots, but more like, here, just go out around campus and, throw these out or plant them or whatever. So anyway, I'm just curious how I should do that. Like, do we just broadcast the seeds, or do we like mix them up with some like soil or sand, or scratch the surface of the land and put them in, or like, can you give me? And it's all different kinds of seeds, and they're all native seeds, plants that grow around here. So maybe they all require different things, but we're doing this with kids, and so just whatever is the most simple thing, I guess.
Are the seeds, can I just ask one question? Then you can probably answer the question, but is each species of seed separate now, or are they already mixed together?
They're separate.
Okay.
I was going to say, this is similar to another question that just came up. Is it possible to sow wildflower seeds at 150-foot elevation at this time of year? So these are related questions. They're about sowing seeds now. And I think that it depends on how frugal you want to be, because if you take a bunch of seeds and you find out if they have similar sort of requirements for growth and so on, then you could mix them together and toss them out and see what happens if you've got a lot of seeds. If you don't have very many seeds, I probably wouldn't do that. I probably would try and plant them more with a mind to what this particular seed might need. So for instance, really small seeds probably should be started in like 6-packs or something, because they get washed away with the water real easily. And they're when they're so small, they break and fall over easily if there's rain or hail. But some of the other seeds are tougher and can take it. Molly says, throwing seed around is pretty ineffective. Well, you're right, Molly. although I do have a selection of seeds that are local here that I call my toss and grow seeds, because I've had luck with what I'm saying, where I'm not skimping on the seeds. I have plenty of seeds. I throw them out and I get results. I get penstemon, the woolly sunflower, clarkia, the bluegilia. Those are all things that are pretty. So Raymond, those are seeds where you could throw those out and probably have some good luck. Other comments from our presenters or others?
Another couple of seed species that if you have them would probably succeed as long as they were, one is the California goldenrod, which both Jeanne and I have, and it produces prolific seeds, and it is quite the volunteer. And another one is common yarrow. That's the white yarrow that you saw in a picture or two that I had. It also grows some seed really easily. And all it needs is, a little water in the time when you remember we used to get regular winter rains.
So that sounds great. And TC commented that weeding the area first is important. That's really right. If you got that thick thatch on there of dried grasses and stuff, it's really hard for the seeds to make contact with the soil, which is the other thing that TC recommends. You need to press the seeds down so they're actually in contact with the soil. So thank you, TC. That's absolutely right. And then Dee Dee had a question. I don't know whether you know about this, Darlene or Chrissy. Is there a place or program we can access to make design plans for the garden?
Oh, I sure hope somebody can answer that question, because I'm still doing what Darlene did, which is, I'm using graph paper and a pencil and a 50-foot tape roll. So I think for free, I'm not aware of anything that's worth using. If anybody knows anything, please share it, and we'll talk about it in our next Redbud newsletter. So just contact Native Plant Help at is it Redbud? Go ahead. CNPS.org.
Yeah.
Let us know.
I think that back on Calscape, there was that very simple garden planner program to get started. But I'm wondering, when Dee Dee asked the question, is she talking about software that you would be designing, or is it planned gardens that somebody has put up on the internet that you could duplicate? Well, we don't know.
Well, so TC says Calscape does have a garden planner for simple plans.
Yeah, it helps you decide whether you want a formal look or a more natural look, that kind of thing. But if you can actually get your hands on any of these books we've talked about, they talk about garden design. I know that the Bornstein book at the front part of it had quite a bit on that.
Right. I'm just going to comment back on the seeds for a minute. Nancy commented that she slightly rakes the seed bed first, mix the seed with sand, so you don't seed too much and seed too tightly, and lightly cover the seeds with a fine loam or a leaf mulch, and don't let the seed bed dry out over winter. So that's good advice from Nancy. And then Raymond had a question about milkweed seeds, and we had a comment from Sandy that they need to be planted in pots first for best results. And I would say I agree with that. My best luck with mulch is putting the milkweed seeds on damp paper towels in plastic bags in the refrigerator for a while and letting them sprout. I have better luck with them coming up after that.
I think they suggest 6 weeks on that.
Mm-hmm.
But again, a search on the internet brings up Xerces, and there's a monarch website, I can't think of the name of it, where they talk about how to germinate milkweed.
So the book title's in the chat. We'll see if we can do that. Or, best way to get it to you is if you send a message, Dee Dee, I can send you the titles.
I put the one that I mentioned, I put in the chat, if that helps.
Yeah, and then Darlene mentioned several.
Yeah.
Yes, the recording of the presentation will be available to watch again. Shane, is the chat part of the recording? No. Okay, not. Thank you.
I think you're supposed to somehow be able to click on something and then keep the chat so you can print it out later.
Yeah, so you could do that.
Tell people where to click. Tell me where to click.
Okay, if you right click with your mouse and there a box pops up that says select all, and then you can do that, and then you hit copy. Then you click again and hit copy. Got that?
Good.
That work?
Yes. I'll
Okay.
get busy and type book titles.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? I'm trying to make sure I've caught. Chrissy commented that milkweed was very easy from seed for her, showy and narrow leaf. Let's see. All right. I think we've got most of that. I really appreciate your comments. I thank Chrissy and Darlene and Carol. And if you missed something, please do email the native plant help at redbud-cnps.org, and we'll get back to you with the best answer we can. So thank you, everybody. Night.
Oh, I'm still trying to type.
Oh, all right. Okay, we'll hang on here. Thank you.
Oh, the wildflower book, they know that one.
Native treasures, right? Good.
Our redbud books. You've got to know the wildflowers and the trees and the shrubs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't do the one that Chrissy mentioned. I think somebody has that further out, don't they?
Yeah, I had put it in, so it's there.
Okay, I did select all. Now it's all ready to copy, I guess. Okay.
Okay.
I'm done.
Thank you. All right. Good night, everybody. Have a great
It has been fun. Good night.
Good night.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, that did it. Thank you, Jeanne. I got the chat.